Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Educational Triage. This is Tony. And of course, we're joined by the fabulous Philip.
Aloha. Good to see you.
And this week, we are not only starting our season 3 after a very brief hiatus, but Philip, you're going to teach us about Dunbar's number because over the past 2 years, you keep alluding to Dunbar's number, and we all want to know, what is Dunbar's number? How does that really play into education and how we form an educational community, or can we even call it a community? So let me just throw the ball over to you and say, what is Dunbar's number? And
All
then
right, let's
how does it
introduce.
relate to our ability to learn and to form meaningful relationships?
All right. Excuse me. It's important to understand Dunbar's number is a theory. Robin Dunbar, I believe he's at Oxford now. He's an American. He's an anthropologist, and he was looking at how people congregate, how they make communities, and what are the features of a community, and what's a feature of a friendship.
But he actually
And
started with, didn't he actually start with primates?
he actually did, yeah. He started with primates. There's there's a video that I've linked that he's in YouTube. He explains it. And primates, now, I'm not real good with the science on this, but primates have a certain capacity to have banding groups. They come in smaller groups. And it's because they don't have as much of a cerebral cortex as humans do. And so humans having a slightly larger one have sort of the same sort of capacity to have relationships, friendships per se. The degree is goes from close friends and then to friends and then to associates and then to acquaintances. But there seems to be a limit, according to Robin Dunbar, about how many of these relationships we can have effectively in a community that's cohesive and flexible and effective.
Okay.
And there's tons of historical proof as well too. He was talking about the original banding groups were only 100 to 150. That magic number, by the way, is 150. So if a group of people stay at 150 members and below, they can form a cohesive group whereby they develop a hierarchy of from acquaintances to just close friends and family, and have that knowledge of those people in their heads and the capacity physiologically to have those relationships. After that, humans tend to break down. They tend to break into subgroups. Things happen. We can talk about that later. But yeah, 150 seems to be the magic number. 100 is a great number too. I was always a big fan of 100. But
So that number 150, does that mean close friendships? Does it
no,
mean, what does
that's
that
it.
mean?
I believe it breaks down to about 10 being, no, maybe 4 or 5 being close friends, 10 being friends or closer friends, kind of like intermediate friends. Let's see. I can't remember. It was in the I was just working with the block. So many things are swimming in my head. It seems to be also at about 50, you kind of lose the capacity to keep everybody at a kind of an associate level. So
Mhm.
it goes close friends, associates. An associate would be somebody that, I had them in education all the time. I had a cohort or a colleague rather who was working in another program, and she would call me and say, "Listen, I got this kid that's perfect for you. Will you take him in the program that you got?" And I'd listen to what she has, and I'd say, "Absolutely, send him on down." So that's associates. And then we'd see each other outside of work occasionally, maybe at a Christmas party. And when there were get-togethers, I spoke with her, and she was kind of closer than maybe a friend, but that associate would be that one where I know somebody and they talk all the time.
Hmm.
After that, they become acquaintances, people that you know, but you don't generally work with very often, or if you do, it's intermittent, or they can come into the associate top 50 and other people from that level can go out, that sort of thing. But you can keep track of 150 human
Right.
beings that way.
I think it was either Dunbar or Stephen Fry who said that the number is 150 because if you were at a foreign airport and you saw one of those 150, you would have no qualms going over there and sitting down and just talking to them
That's a
because
perfect example.
they're you're at that comfort level with them because you know them and they already know who you are, so there's no reason for you to have to do introductions
Yeah,
or
thank you. Yeah,
anything
that's
like that.
perfect. All
So,
of a sudden, they would come into your close group if you're in that foreign airport. Yeah,
well, a close group for that point in
that
time.
situation. Yeah, that point in time. Yeah.
But what makes a friend? What makes
Well, yeah.
that's
Thank you.
this is the big question. What is a friend? I worked with
Mm,
somebody who, and I had to keep correcting them and tell them that we were colleagues, we were not friends.
mm,
And they
mm,
said, "Well, what do you mean? I always thought we were good close friends." And I said, "One, you've never asked me out to dinner or had me over to your house,
mhm,
and I've never had you over to my house. We don't do anything outside. I have invited you to do things outside, but
mhm.
that was it. Once my portion was done, you left and you didn't reciprocate or do anything. So it's pretty much you consider anybody who you talk to during the day or work with, or however you come into contact with them as a friend. And that's not what a friend is. That's a colleague
Yeah. You're getting a little deeper too,
or an
just
acquaintance.
because yeah, there are a lot of people that go on Facebook and they say, "Well, I have 500 friends. I have 1,000 friends," and those are not friends. Those
Those are
are
not
just
friends.
those are not friends. Yeah. Some people think that perhaps those are meaningful relationships, but there's really nothing to those relationships. You know, there's no trust bond or basis for it. So yeah.
Right, because you can't have 500 friends and then
Oh,
complain that you
no.
have mental illness because you're suffering from such loneliness. You
I
can't
was gonna
have that
say,
kind of loneliness if you have 500 bloody friends, right?
if you're telling 500 friends you're isolated, I think that there's a oxymoron in there.
Yeah, it's a little strange. So,
Yeah.
getting away from virtual friends
Yeah, virtual,
and
no
people
virtuals. You get
who
into
are
the
like
real life.
your
Right.
Facebook, your threads, your
Yeah.
whatever, your
So
followers,
four
what have you.
friends, four close friends in your life or your group. Now let's think it's situational too. It's
But it's
situational
different
because
than
I can think
family.
it's different than your whole entire life as well. Some people keep work and their personal life separated.
Mhm.
And some people don't mix the two as very often. They'll be it takes a strong group to do that, and it takes a small group to do that. But within the situation that you have like three or four people that you're fairly close to. You confide in. You let me bounce this idea off you. Maybe I'm crazy. Tell me if I am. I trust you to tell me.
Mhm.
And then you have friends. The other cohorts. And we're talking about peer systems. In a school system, that friend thing kind of goes out the window with kids. And we can talk about that because a teacher should not be a kid's friend. That we all agree that that's a boundary.
Right, there's a
Being
boundary.
buddies with a student is not appropriate.
Right.
But you can be buddies, go out to lunch with the same group of people, every day, and they're your friends, and you meet around that lunch, and
Mhm.
and maybe that group doesn't include some people who you tell, confide in about that crazy idea you have, we bounce off of you. But
So
you can talk about your husband or your wife or your family or your,
mhm.
things like that. Your hobbies, your travel. You feel good about that. Yeah,
But
and then
people
the
do
rest
that
of
with
them are
strangers too,
acquaintances.
don't they?
Well, but it's small talk. With this, you mean it. It's long. it's like, what happened with that thing that you had going, that sort of conversation. So these people they're closer than acquaintances, but they're not real close friends. And
Oh,
so
you're talking
that's,
about
that
work. You're talking about work friends.
work. I am talking about work. I'm talking about, in this
Okay.
case, work just because it's the institution that we can use. Some people keep them separate, and in their regular life, they have a whole different set.
Right.
They got, well, they're, depending on how they get along with their family may be just acquaintances, or they may be their brother or sister is their best friend in the world. But yeah, it's in a situational social situation. Yeah, it's not your whole life,
Hmm.
all inclusive. Going back
But
to you
what
though, it's
makes
interesting. Yeah,
but
he
what
might have thought
makes
within work you
a
were
good
friends, but
friend? How do you define
yeah,
a good friend? Is it shared
yeah,
experience? Is it an
yes,
emotional trust and bond that you
yes,
have? I believe in the
yeah,
book he talks about how the friends that you had in high school you were very close to, but then you no longer have the bond of high school because you're all going off
yeah.
onto different life experiences. So that's not there anymore.
Right. There's like a nostalgic friendship there. We all
And
have the high
so
school
it
buddies. Yeah,
changes, right? And so the parameters change, and you're bound to make better
yeah,
friends, closer friends. Maybe you still keep in touch with some of those friends and they stay friends, but that's not as typical as you might think. Is that correct?
yeah. I mean, in my situation, I have a good friend from high school, even junior high school, but and we graduated together. Now he's no longer a friend; he's just an acquaintance. I
Mhm.
don't share a lot of the beliefs he has, and we don't seem to connect like we used to. Obviously, it's over the
Right.
years, but I still call him, and we still hang out, and we still talk about jazz music. That's his shtick. He likes it a lot. But I wouldn't consider him a close friend anymore. Once upon a time, he's one of two or three close friends. Yeah,
So these numbers well, not the numbers, but the friendships can change. They can evolve. They go
yeah.
through
You can only
they
keep
shift through
at one
different
time.
phases.
Yep, at one time you got that capacity, but people come and go.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we might have four or five, a handful of those. We
Mhm.
have our family and the
We have
difference
20,
between
up to
family.
20 with the fans or something. Yeah, I'm sorry, difference in family. You're right. I was going
Right.
to say
And the
up to
difference
20 is your friends.
the difference in family, which I tend to disagree with sometimes, depending on, but that's all anecdotal,
Yeah.
is you would probably tend to save a family member's life before you would a friend. But I can think of a lot of
Yeah.
people who would say, no, I
I,
wouldn't. So it that all varies, but with the
yeah.
typical example, that's what they would do. So, okay.
Yeah.
So we know that there's an emotional bond, shared experience, et cetera, et cetera. Now let's take that number of 150 because I'm
Mhm.
just thinking about time and how we can get into some of the nitty gritty a little bit later.
Uh,
How does Dunbar's number? What's the impact? What's the effect? What's the importance in education? Why should we as educators care?
Right. So it's kind of apparent if you take out all the political and budgetary questions, because when I talk about Dunbar's number, I'm going to say this. I think no school site should be bigger than 150 students and staff and support. And when I say
Total.
that, people go, oh my goodness, you know how expensive that is? It's like, yes. However, that's what I think would be a very ideal learning situation because at that site, you have everything you need and you have the basis for trust amongst everyone there because you have the mental capacity to do that. You can form a community with that 150 and less, and it forms sort of a norm. And the norm of that community is pretty much based upon a pretty egalitarian way of looking at it. 150 people have a lot of voice in there, each one. And you can operate very effectively in there. You can also learn really well in there too. because you get those bonds of trust, and we all know about that. Relationships, if you can develop those relationships with the students, then they learn much better, and they held themselves accountable for the learning as well, because it's a community, it's a band. And I could give you a lot of examples of what could happen within that, but say you have a community of Pacific Islanders there, just happens to be there's, if you're 150, they got students there, maybe 10, 15 students are Pacific Islander. Well, coming with them comes that culture and their families and things like that. And pretty soon, in 150 people, you've got a strong cultural awareness of Pacific Island culture, which just empowers those kids because they feel like they have a place there. And in a small community like that, they do. It's
I'm
contagious.
I'm going to I'm going to tell you that the use of the term community, I'm going to let you get away with that this week, because next week we're going to address what is a community
Yeah,
actually,
let's
and
talk
can a
about
school actually
sociologically. Yeah,
be a community?
right,
Because we're taking a look at what are the relationships and how do
right,
communities function and how do schools function. But that's next week. So
right. And I'm
so if
anxious
you're
to see that
subscribed,
because,
you will know. So make sure
yeah,
that you hit that button. But I can't, where was I going with that? You were talking about, about the culture and learning from it. So
yeah,
how do you get, okay, so you have this community, you call the school a community, and it's
yeah,
smaller. Do
yeah.
you do something in that community then
Mhm.
where Elon Musk talks about the program called Ad Astra? And that's where the students go in. It's almost unschooling. And it's where the students go in and the students determine what it is that they're going to study because they're going to learn something. And
Oh,
so they start learning they start learning the language,
yeah.
the reading, the writing, they start learning the math, but it's all for a particular reason. So it's all relevant. And so they're going after something. And so pieces fall into place on a natural evolutionary kind of manner. Is that the same kind of thing that you think about with the community, or are you still talking about compliance with a bell and with set?
No, 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 because that's perfect. Elon Musk using that Astra program and forming its own course is the way learning is actually done. And within 150 and below, you can pull that off. You can make that happen because it's small enough that people feel valued. And when they feel valued, you can work with that. You can form teams and leaders come forward, and not everyone can be a leader, but everyone can lead with expertise. And a good leader would know, for example, hey, I don't know anything about that, but ask so and so, they're the expert on that. And so that network opens up, and all the way to 150, really. And so
Right.
it organically and flexibly evolves. Yeah, it's
And
perfect. That's exactly it.
so my question is, is the school, maybe the school isn't a community, and we can argue this if we want to, but you can bat me off. Is the school more of a network or is it really a community?
The network comes from knowing what other learning. Okay, so if you have other learning communities, and we should probably get a better word for this, right? That are 150 and less, they have different flavors to them. They have different courses, different objectives. I worked in the district where there was a strong one that had an internship. I think it was a couple days a week. They're out doing stuff in the community, working with in the community of people that we live in, working at businesses, and then they go do work at school. Okay, if
Mhm.
that is your thing, if that fits better for you as a student, or if you're looking to do a vocational sort of internship with that kind of community, then you could go to that community, and that's where you could find what you're looking for. So it's a network of these communities that tend to cater to the population that's even larger. I worked in one small program of 35 kids, but it had a teen parent program. Only one in the district, you had to go there. So that's, if you're a teen parent, you pretty much went to that program, but it was wonderful. And then sometimes the kids would drop their children off in the morning at the childcare center and then go to the high school to classes. Again, a network.
Hmm. So Malcolm Gladwell, in his book, The Tipping Point, he
Hmm.
discusses that teachers, in a sense, well, he doesn't say teachers per se, but he alludes to it, and that's how I picked up on it. So if
Leads to
anybody
us.
wants to give me grief, don't.
Yeah,
Teachers are more of a connector that works within the realm of the networks.
he's absolutely right.
So can you talk a little bit about that and how and the does every teacher then serve 150 students?
No, it if you're smart and you
Because
funded everything and it's got all the resources it needs, then the teacher student ratio should be that it should be accommodating. I would say ideally I would love something that could 150. Let's say the support staff in that building is 5, and
Mhm.
that would be maybe pairs. Let's make it 6. Pairs, a secretary and an administrator. And
Okay.
then the rest is teachers and students. So that makes, oh gosh, 100, let's say 142. I'll give you that 8. Okay, now that's
One
100, my
teacher
gosh,
for
that's a lot.
every 20 students.
Yeah, so
So
what's
that
that
gives you
then?
7.
5, 6, 7, 7. I think that's 7 to 8 teachers is perfect for that. And the reason I say 8 is because your community is going to lean towards something that may be unusual, like 3D printing, technology makerspace stuff, robotics, and you might want to hire a teacher who does robotics. Or there's also adjunct staff that are paid for by, I believe AmeriCorps had a program where some teachers came
Mhm.
in and things,
They do.
and they would run a whole side program out in the field. I remember one was they were working in the bog and swamp on a project, a restoration project, and these kids would wade in the mud in these big boots. They just loved it, but they learned a ton. And
Mhm.
so there it would be. I agree with that. I know a lot in my head, but wow, I don't know hardly anything compared to what's in the world. So yeah, being a facilitator and a mentor, yeah,
So how does that impact learning? If kids
yeah,
are
well,
in a
yeah,
smaller classroom, because we all keep talking about advocating for smaller class sizes,
yeah,
we know that a lot of communities can't afford that, but they
that's the problem. That's a problem, yeah, because we really owe it to the kids to have a teacher-student ratio
Mhm.
that's viable. I mean, every teacher works really hard to reach every student, and some students work really hard not to be reached at all, which is really tough. But if you have a low ratio, you hope for that relationship. You can get to know the students. The students can feel like they have some empowerment. They're autonomous. I've gotten it with a kid that just wouldn't even really talk to me. I figured out through just questioning and looking at facial expressions what they wanted really to learn about. And then I just catered the lesson to that. And I kind of broke some ice on that. And they said, well, wow, you're really working at listening to me, but I'm not telling you anything. And things like that. I have the time to do that with a low student teacher ratio. And the kid has that time to develop that relationship. They just don't go to the next period and then start over.
How does
They
that
stay,
but how does that impact attendance and student achievement, etc.?
they want to be there. One of the community norms that you'd have to establish is an attendance policy. Look, don't, what I used to say, you can't do the school thing if you don't come to school. And so, what can we do to get you a different schedule that can help you, or a different program that you're interested in? Don't just say, "Well, you're not cutting it here, take off," that sort of thing. And then an academic sort of policy whereby it's realistic to graduate by the time you're 18. If I do the math and you have to earn these many credits, we should shoot for that. And then, of course, the behavior, which comes, that is really the key, because if you have the community norms and it's the same for everybody and it's fair, then everybody understands their status there is valuable because they're earning it in a way. It's not just I can, they just sent me here and I can do anything I want. It's like, no, you're part of a general community of people. Yeah. And this is the standard. And then you can encourage those relationships with agency of curriculum, develop curriculum catered to the kids.
with their
You can get to a
ILP.
lot of stuff. Yeah. I can get to stuff through almost any topic. I mean, within reason. I mean, even chemistry, gosh, take me out on a walk and we can talk chemistry. It's out, it's everywhere.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's very, people just want to learn. Humans really do want to learn, and kids really want to learn, but they don't want to be told they, anything, what to learn,
And they
how to
don't want to
learn.
be put.
No,
They don't want to be put on the stage to
that
perform
too.
like monkeys. In a
Yeah,
sense, they
that
don't
too.
want, because sometimes they're unsure of themselves, and so they don't want you to call on them to read. They don't want you to have them go up to the board to write things down to show
Hmm.
what they have. So sometimes using a group where the group creates something and they can work together in a small group. Maybe it's a table group of 4 and everybody
Right.
does the problem. And if somebody's not understanding it, then the other people in the group can turn and help them. Or if
Pairs
nobody in
work.
the group knows, then that's when the teacher can be the facilitator and come in and help them.
Right.
So,
Right. And the teacher facilitates that situation itself
right,
to let it
right.
happen.
Because
Right.
that gives the teacher immediate feedback as far as what people are learning and what they're having an inability to comprehend
Right.
for whatever reason. Let me ask you this. You also bring up in the blog about the Navy SEALs.
Oh, yeah.
What in bloody tarnation does that have to do with education?
Well, it has, geez, that's a good question. Excuse me. The Navy SEALs are some of the most educated humans on the planet. These guys are in classrooms constantly anyway, learning and learning. Special forces, Green Berets in the army, they know languages. They learn languages in a matter of months. So they know how to learn. And they also know that in small teams, there's a flexibility and a knowledge base and a cohesiveness that makes them what's called a force multiplier. Like, let's all be serious about, I'd be much more scared about a squad of 8 SEALs than 50 infantry platoon men. Like, it's just those 8 SEALs are like just a one unit wrecking crew. They're fluid. They do what they do for the man on the right and the man or the person on their left and right. The stakes are high. The consequences are high. The intelligence is uber high. And they know that if you keep it in a small group situation, they can be flexible. They can learn quick. They can meet your objective because it usually goes to pieces the moment they hit the ground. That's when the plan just goes and falls apart. So, really, every operation they go on is a learning sort of process, and they do it like on the move, and they do it in small groups. None of those groups are bigger than 120 when they go battle operational, and that's including the SOAR members, the helicopter pilots, special operations aviation regiment, SOAR. They're just as
Mhm.
trained. They're small, they're tight. These guys around them are not acquaintances. Actually, they're more of like brothers, but they are acquaintances. They don't. If you've earned the Trident, for example, you earn a reputation. Every SEAL pretty much has heard of every other SEAL, no matter where they are in the world after about a
Mhm.
year. Oh yeah, I heard about you're over in the you're in SEAL Team 4, you're over here. It's so small they know each other, and they wear the
But
trident. They can trust each other, so they've
but
earned a
they
rank. They've
are
earned the
also,
membership in the community. Yeah.
well, in the evolution of warfare, they still
Yeah.
maintain and still retain the solid elements of the early militia of the United States, which was guerrilla
No.
warfare, because we were some of the first
Well,
guerrilla. We did
there's
the
so much.
revolution
Yeah.
had guerrilla warfare, and so that's what they're doing because
Yeah.
they're not fighting as an
No.
infantry.
No, they don't. They're a force multiplier. So yeah, the thing they did was there used to be you get in the army and then you get out. They're professional soldiers,
Right.
and their lives depend on knowing like more than the enemy, being smarter than the enemy, constantly being more flexible and cohesive than the
Right.
enemy. And that, I mean, it seems it's an extreme example of what you can do in any community. These guys just go and they do dangerous things and then return, because they're that cohesive, flexible, and dedicated to it. They're small groups. And if they were big groups, it wouldn't work. Big groups fracture. They tend to gain cliques around a couple of. You get a solid friendship between two or three. A clique will develop around that. Things like that. If you get over 150,
Hmm.
and they don't have that.
So what happens, flipping around a little bit and getting back onto the lily pad we were on earlier,
Yeah, yeah,
let's take a look at, you've got a small school. Is there any way for a mainstream high school? Now, I taught in one that was around 2,000 students. I know of schools that have over 4,000 students. How do they, how could they capitalize on creating smaller elements? Or could they? Do you think that there is a way that they could do that within that structure? Or do you think that that entire structure has to be dismantled in
I
order for,
suspect.
because after
Yeah,
a while, when you have an institution that's that huge,
yeah,
it's more about containing the students and
yeah,
policing them
yeah,
than it is actually teaching
yeah.
them.
That's
So
that.
so how do you,
Yeah.
if you have any ideas with your years of expertise, how do you can how do you
Thank you.
take care of that element and reverse it so that it's not about
Yeah.
containment, but it's about attainment?
Yeah. I suspect that those big high schools are just not gonna work for that at all, for Dunbar's number. Here's the thing. So even if you said, I've seen this in like middle schools and high schools, you got like Oak Hall and Spruce Hall and Pine Hall, and you belong to that hall. And I've even seen it where the middle school actually had almost a barrier between them. They had like a red rope, like the velvet, but the red
Right,
rope kind of thing.
right.
And
Those don't
it
work.
still it didn't work because the kids just felt like they were a finger on a hand. They didn't feel the ownership of the community. It was a small community and they were working in it. But then they would go into the cafeterias or they would go into the gym areas, common areas, and that behavior, that big population in the school will just kind of like it's sort of like a foundation. The
So,
one kid who's a jerk is a jerk. He's still a jerk, but he's over in
mhm,
Spruce, not Pine anymore. And his antics
right.
because when you go at lunch, he tells you how he was doing it. That destroys the community. It just the connection's too great. His friends, the friends that meet between the two of them, they become that friendship group, and that has nothing to do with one of those halls. And that's why they're at school, is to be in those halls like all the time. They don't know better, and so they just see it as a kind of a restriction in movement. less than a community.
So they're
And
more
so
of a
it has,
gulag in the archipelago.
well, kind of, schools are designed by the same folks who designed prisons, for God's sake. So, duh. I went
Right.
down a hall the other day and I went, holy cow. I would be seriously out of breath if I ran down this hall. It
Right.
was
And I've been
huge. Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of reading with John Taylor Gatto, with Nicole Goyle, with Matt
Yeah.
Hearn, with John Abbott and Tony Little. I've been reading up on the list that you inadvertently gave me, and I'm finding it's really kind of it's sad to think that we have these huge institutions that are meant to teach compliance. They don't really teach much in skills to children.
Mhm.
And if they are supposed to be teaching to skills, those skills are woefully lacking year after year because the expectations have been lowered generation to generation to generation. So I'm wondering
Mm.
whether or not,
It's more than that, but yeah.
well, I'm trying to keep that from
Yeah.
becoming the talking point.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we had better numbers, do you think the attainment and the achievement level, because of the ability to have more innovation and the comfort level of the students feeling as though they belong and
Yeah.
that this is something that they own, do you believe that we would have higher achieving students, not necessarily to a test, but higher achieving in thought, in word, in deed?
Yeah. Oh, I think you can have both. I mean, when I was doing it in that small environment, the kids made standards. That was the graduation requirement, and that was one of our targets. And there we went. But the
Right,
journey to it was a much different journey. Yeah, I would go on record as saying, yeah, if schools were more like little satellite communities of 150 and less and just networked each other. Now there'd have to be, some allowances because you got the traditional high school football, basketball, volleyball, swimming, all that stuff. And then, the pep rallies. Some kids really enjoy those things. And so, I mean, that has
right.
to still be around, but
Well, there's a way to manage all that. I mean, you don't
sure.
have to every small school community, if that's what we're going to call them, could be
Yeah.
part of a bigger project where this
I like
some of the
that.
students could participate with others and they could kind of have like their community recreation center, so to speak.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah. Or you could still just have the regular high schools. I mean, some kids really thrive in that. But
Hmm.
you don't put everyone in there and you don't make them, like 3,000 students. If you think about it, it's no surprise whatsoever to the average uneducated person who's not a sociologist to know that if you put 3,000 kids in a single building or in a complex that's so close to each other, it might as well be, you're going to have a pretty weird social system because they'll create it.
Right. And so let's what if we looked at that like a society?
I do. But yeah, yeah.
What if each school was its own society?
Hmm. My God. Exactly right.
Would you have a more functional society with a smaller group than with a larger group?
You would have a functional society because the society has to be huge. However, that it's apples and oranges because a band is about 150. A society is huge, but that might be what destroyed the band mentality. That may be where our downfall would be. Like creating cities and factories like that.
Hmm.
Can you pause for a second? Just I gotta go across my room.
Okay, we're winding down. So what do you believe educators and school administrators can do to improve the quality of relationships and these communities, networks within the schools, regardless of the size of them? And I mean by networks, the networks between the teachers and the students, networks between the administration and the teachers, and
Yeah.
also the networks between the administrators and the children and the parents
Are you talking about in
and
the
the
building
community.
site itself? Like the 150 or less building site or less?
I'm talking about if we look at the relationships that you can build with those networks that you have,
Right.
how
Okay.
can
Yeah.
you take that, because you already know if something works in a small building, what they're going to say, and it's successful. And I've seen this far too many times, and they absolutely ruin all the programs because they say,
Hmm.
look, it works for them. We're going to expand it and make it bigger. No, it worked because it was in a smaller setting.
Correct.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
not going to work for a bigger one. And they have this arrogance of, well, I'll decide what works and what doesn't work, rather than take a look and actually have a conversation and study it to see what the whole purpose behind that was. So, but how could they, let's say, take this and implement it? So let's say that instead of a Gulag archipelago, like you were talking about, where they have the robin set and the bluebird set and
Hmm.
the parrot set
Hmm.
in a school, and they're all differentiated, how do you make that so that could work? Or do you just throw that all away and do something else?
I think you throw it away. While you were talking about the networks, you were talking about the net. You were talking about the network between the administrator and the kids. And I wanted to
Yeah.
make a comment. There isn't a network between the administrator and the kids. But I've actually worked in a building where our administrator was known and loved by the kids. Our one administrator, and she had an office that was really accessible and right there, and she was part of
Hmm.
the staff. In fact, the staff would go in, we'd sit down and talk and get up and leave, and it was very door open policy stuff. So it got me thinking, we're kind of in trouble when we're building these huge schools and they have four administrators. It's like,
Or
why are
more.
we paying so much? Yeah, for them to administrate that facility. It should run itself, because if the curriculum comes, from below and the teachers are working with it, you don't need administrators. Just one on site, the smaller schools, and they all know each other. And this whole fleet of, the office and the administrators, there's no need for it. I'm just thinking, why we hired all these people just to figure out this big building. It has nothing to do with learning.
Right. Right.
Oops.
That's a little bee for people's bonnets, I think.
I
And
think so. Yeah,
to be honest, I think that's where we're going to have to end today.
that works.
Thank you, Philip.
Oh, you're welcome. I thought you were going to say something else. Yeah. Yeah, it just occurred to me. We have a whole, we have operators of the school that don't have much to do with the inhabitants. It's very
Right.
strange.
Right. It gives us a lot to think about.
Hmm.
And yeah, so thank you for that. And next week, we will take on institutions, communities, networks, and we'll
We're
delve
gonna work up the
into that.
sociological ladder. Yeah,
Yeah, and see where we go. So that's taking this just one step further. So I encourage everybody to write in. Check out Philip's blog. That will be linked below, as well as some of his other links and with the show notes. So thank you very much. And we
welcome.
will see you again next week. Until
Hello.
then, au revoir. Goodbye.
That too.